We were discussing about how it's not freezing cryopreservation. What is it instead? I've heard the term vitrification. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is in fact the totally correct term. That is the technical term. So vitrification means basically a phase transition from into a glass-like amorphous state, right? And of course, the trick here being freezing means ice crystal formation, right? Where you have sharp
Yeah.
ice crystals and a variety of other types of damage. If you vitrify, go into this glass-like state, you avoid all this crystallization. And by that, you get preservation quality that if you warm it up fast enough, at least in simple terms, you would, in theory, regain viability and the tissue still works. Whereas if it's freezing, the tissue would be not necessarily destroyed, but at least by current standards, it would not be viable. It is exactly that. It is an ice-free cryopreservation, a vitrification, or like this glass-like, in a glass-like amorphous state preservation.
Yeah. So instead of turning people into ice, you're turning them into glass.
Pretty much, exactly. And then the goal would be in the future. And this is, of course, so in cells, you can do this right now. So cell preservation, be it for in vitro fertilization, where you cryopreserve egg cells or sperm, or in the lab, basically being done every day with a lot of different cell lines, they use the same technology. They vitrify those cells, which then allows them to be rewarmed and, yeah, basically while the cell survives. And now, of course, in our case, you would do that with much larger volumes. You can do it even with small organs right now, but humans are not yet possible to at least bring back. You can bring them into this vitrified state. You can show that the quality at that vitrified state is good. What you cannot yet do is you cannot yet bring them back from that vitrified state. And that, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the future will be possible at some point.
Yeah. I've read that during that process of vitrification, is the blood removed and then replaced with a different fluid? Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, in fact, it is. So not only the blood, but also basically all the water in the body. So one of the ways why we don't freeze is because the blood is placed, and the water as well, against a cryoprotective agent, which is pretty much a medical grade antifreeze solution. A solution that even with very low temperatures, in our case, at least negative 140 degrees, many cases negative 196 degrees, does not freeze. Now, that is the core logic of it, that the water that would otherwise form ice crystals is not there anymore, or partially it's still there, but at least it's in so small concentration that it doesn't freeze.
And is it true that when you cryopreserve someone, they haven't actually fully died? Because I always thought someone died, they were gone, they were deceased, and then you just froze them. But what's the misconception there? What is the actual case?
There's not that much of a misconception actually in that. So the people who get cryopreserved, they are, by all current medical and legal standards, they are dead. In fact, cryopreservation can only be done once someone has legally been pronounced dead. Right? For a variety of course, ethical and so on and medical reasons, cryopreservation is not a medical procedure. It is a donation for the long-term, for cryopreservation, basically, based on a body donation contract that can only be executed once that person has legally been pronounced. So what does happen is, so the person's heart stops at some point, right? They might have a terminal condition, let it be cancer or heart disease or doesn't matter, or organ failure. Once their heart stops, based on where you are, the US and Europe and specific countries, different countries have different rules of under which circumstances you can pronounce legal death. That happens after the heart stops. And then cryopreservation can start after that has happened, after that legal pronouncement. So they're not preserved while they're alive or anything like that. Now, the logic being that there's a certain amount of time, if my heart would stop right now because I don't know, have a heart attack, or I don't know what it might be, right? There's a certain amount of, at room temperature, at body temperature, a certain amount of minutes, if EMTs or doctors would come and do chest compressions and give oxygen and all of that, right? They would be able to revive me somewhere, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, and so on, like a couple of minutes. And now cryopreservation, the logic is that in that time frame where in theory, if you would do it, right, let's say someone dies due to cancer, right, their heart stops, the person is pronounced, and then in that time frame where in theory their body would still be able to support life, bar the cancer, of course, then of course that's why you don't try to resuscitate them, because they would just die in another hour later because of the organ failure or whatever the underlying reason due to the cancer is. In that time, you cool down the whole body and you stop all the degradation processes once you're at these cryogenic temperatures. And now the plan, of course, or the hope or the prediction would be that in the future, at some point, the underlying condition that led to the patient's death, in this case, the cancer, would be curable. And then you could, in theory, resuscitate that person, and then they might live happily ever after. And of course, no one does that because they say, hey, listen, I just want to be cryopreserved tomorrow. People only and exclusively do this because they say, I have a terminal condition and my choice is, I have two choices. I can either be cryopreserved or I can be cremated or buried. And then based on the personal worldview of people who choose that, in almost all cases, in their mind, if they're buried or cremated, that's it. There's no coming back from that. The probability of coming back from that is zero.
Yeah.
And now, at the very least, and that's the only strong statement I'm willing to make, at the very least, cryopreservation has a better probability. I can't say how much better, but I'm very confident it's better than cremation. So something when I give talks, I'm saying, listen, you have two choices. If you're not signed up for cryopreservation, you have implicitly signed up for cremation or burial. But to be fair, not much difference between those two. So you can choose between cryo or burial. And this is a choice that everybody either explicitly or implicitly needs to make. And if someone says, hey, I'd rather be cremated, totally fine. It's an individual choice. But if someone says, I'd rather be cryopreserved, then of course I would say, I very much understand that. And of course, for me personally, the choice is very clear.